Looking for tips and tricks on a new city? Top Dog Tours is the best place to check out walking tours. We are in Boston, Philadelphia, Toronto, and New York City. Visit us on topdogtours.com to book your tour today and check us out on social media for offers, discounts, and pictures. So this is part 2 of my interview with Dr. Logan Levkov. I hope you enjoy it. We've noticed that when you are trying to conceive, sometimes sex can be like a...
terrible.
It can be terrible. It's terrible. There's a lot of pressure. It's terrible. There's a lot of pressure. There's, it's like scheduled too, which is nobody wants to be like, okay, well, these are the days we need to have sex. And I feel like that's something that I'm curious about. If there's a couple who is trying to conceive, especially if you're having fertility problems, and it's like a year in, and, because a lot of couples, they try to have sex, naturally conceive for more than a year before they start fertility treatments. What's your advice for these people? Because it can be very difficult.
Sex, goal-oriented sex for the purpose of conception is brutal. It is a chore. It feels like a job. It does not feel anything like a sexual, intimate, pleasurable experience. So first thing to know is don't feel guilty if that is your experience, because that's what most people are experiencing, but no one likes to talk about it, right? I think the other piece of it is we need to think about what are the little things we can do to make it feel more intimate? By the way, having pleasure, like real pleasure, is a part of that, right? There's no reason why you can't, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an orgasm, but it certainly could be, or anything leading up to it. It should still be something that you enjoy. And by the way, that kind of relaxation also helps everything too, right?
Yeah.
So there is that, or the way in which you set up your room, or I always laugh, and it's so silly, but what's really not sexy? When you are having some kind of sexual experience, you turn over and in your eye line is like a picture of your family or religious iconography or your kids. Like that's miserable, right? So there are things we can do to create environments around us that at least make it feel slightly sexier, for lack of a better word, instead of like an institutional job.
Yeah. Is that also your advice to parents, who aren't trying to conceive but trying to keep an active sex life? Like,
get the pictures out of your room.
Yeah, don't have a picture of your 2-year-old next to your bed, or maybe your grandmother, or a cross, or whatever your religious affiliation is on the wall.
Yeah, I think in general, look, I'm never going to be that sexuality professional that says take your TV out of your bedroom, because I love my TV in my bedroom and I will never take it out. I'm sorry. Beg, scream, whatever. It's never coming out of my bedroom. I love it. So that's my guilty pleasure. But yeah, how sexy are you going to feel if you're looking at your parents? Like you're sitting up, someone is on top of you, or vice versa, and you're like looking at your in-laws. Like that's not really exciting.
No, it's not.
No.
Is there other than taking away the pictures of your in-laws, what advice do you have for parents, especially of young children, when you're exhausted all the time and sometimes kids are sleeping in your bed, and how to keep an active sex life with that? What would be your advice?
There are a lot of different sex acts that still end in pleasure, that don't have to be, sexual intercourse if you don't have time or the space for it because someone is sleeping between you. There's the most boring saying in the sex ed relationship space, which is the concept of scheduling sex, scheduling a date night. It is so painfully boring and horrific as a concept. However, the reason why everyone tells you it is because it works, because you are actively putting aside time. This is going to be the time that it's going to be for us. And also, I do think that even when you're tired, and I'm not saying that we should give in to each other's needs all the time. However, a little bit of intimacy and pleasure like begets more. Like it winds up being really good. So yeah, maybe one day you wake up 20 minutes earlier, and fool around before the alarm, like your real alarm clock. And yes, will you be tired? Yes, you probably will be. But within 5 minutes, you will be a hell of a lot less tired and a hell of a lot more aroused, and it will feel great for the rest of your day.
And probably have a better day in the long run.
Yes.
So this is not a pleasurable question. Really, really pivoting. How do you think the repeal of Roe v. Wade has affected the necessity of sex education and safe sex? Because I love how outspoken you are about being pro-choice on your Instagram. And I know that a lot of people are afraid to talk about being pro-choice because of all the things out there. But how is, in the past, I think it's been almost 2 years now, how has that affected the way that you talk about sex and just sex education in general?
Truth be told, it hasn't changed what I do, because I believe that it's important to know all of the options and all of the potential outcomes, regardless of whether or not your state gives you the right to bodily autonomy. So my information that I impart doesn't change. However, I do have lots of conversations these days around how current events and laws impact people's sexual health. And that's an important conversation to have. So depending on where you live, and by the way, we know what's happening in Alabama now.
That's
with
crazy.
Fertilized embryos being people, right? Like, so those are great conversations because it starts getting young people to think, not just think about what things mean, but choices they make in the future. What does that mean for them as an individual? What would that mean in a partnership? What would it mean if they went to college in another state? So there are lots of critical thinking skills that can come out of talking about political issues that I find highly problematic. So I think that while the information I impart, just my general sex ed information doesn't change, I guess I'll tweak my answer a little bit. It has provided me opportunities to get people to think about how changing laws impact sexual health. How we can't say that sexual health isn't political, because there are decisions that get made all of the time that impact what you do and how you do it and your access to things, even if you had no say over it. So that's an important skill for people to develop.
Do you think, kind of on the flip side of that, the Me Too movement has affected the way people talk about sex?
I mean, I have to tell you, these days I'm very angry with the Me Too movement, because it seems to be Me Too is only important unless you are Israeli.
Yes. We're going to talk about that in a little bit.
Okay, so good. Oh, good. So
that's I'm not afraid. We're hitting the hard questions here, because I'm.
Yeah, no. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that we're having those.
But I remember there was kind of this, because I see a whole slew of things on the internet after the Me Too movement kind of happened, of men being like, well, now I'm afraid that any sort of sexual experience I have with a woman, she can turn around and say that I didn't want it. I think that there was kind of, not that I necessarily agree with that. I feel like consent is super important, and you can make consent sexy if you want. But I feel like it kind of changed the narrative, especially I think maybe for young men, about sex.
The conversations around Me Too and consent, how Me Too changed our global conversations is, well, everyone was talking about it. Everyone was talking about it, and high profile people were getting, in hot water for doing things that they've done for years.
Which were not really secrets.
No. Right. And there were a lot of enablers in all of those dynamics, right?
Yeah.
Who were also responsible for creating those cultures. As sexuality educators, we are always talking about consent and the importance of having a voice and how to be the kind of person that someone is willing to share their body with. And so to me, conversations, if I ever hear someone say like, oh, obviously someone is going to say no, say that something happened in order to get a man in trouble. I mean, obviously that is rooted in such misogyny. It's horrific. And I bristle at the thought. But if you are a stand-up partner who values someone's voice, who asks the right questions, who says, I want to be respectful of your boundaries and vice versa. Tell me what you want and what you don't want, and it's okay no matter what. Then you are creating a dynamic where no one is deliberately going to get you into trouble, because that's just shitty people would do that regardless of gender.
Yeah.
That's not a gender thing. And if we're all honest and upfront about what we want and what we don't want, then we're actually breaking that cycle. Because for years, people didn't talk about what they want. They made assumptions and went for it, and then found it after someone's like, we really wasn't into that.
I think the idea of consent in the way that it is today is also very new, because I feel like you just kind of, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way to say this. Like, of my generation, the idea of being like really honest about what you wanted and what you weren't comfortable with was not something that was really advocated for, if that makes any sense. Like, you were just kind of like, well, I guess this is the way that, this is how this works. So that's what you're supposed to do. And I feel like there was a pressure to do things. So, I mean, I have major issues with the Me Too movement as well, for various reasons. But I think what did kind of come from the conversation was a solidarity between women, realizing that a lot of us have had sexual experience or unwanted sexual attention and not making us feel alone, but also, the idea of consent. And also like preventing mixed messages. Because if you're like, hey, I'm not cool with this, like it's, again, if you have a respectful partner, they're gonna be like, okay,
Right. I mean, a lot of these conversations wind up being litmus tests for whether or not someone is a worthy sexual partner, right? And sometimes, and I'm outside of the Me Too movement, I think we in general need to do a better job at trusting our gut, and when someone like is giving us clues that maybe they're not really concerned about our pleasure or what we want, instead of like crossing our fingers, like maybe it'll work out. Maybe we should just realize, signs are not pointing in the right direction. I think I'm going to go meet someone else.
Yeah. Which I think you need to know that you can do, and it can be, appropriate to do that. So let's talk.
Absolutely. And again, I would just say this. I think similarly, there are also experiences that are just kind of gray, for lack of a better term. Experiences where like maybe you didn't really love it, but you didn't say something negative. The other person, you're not really sure, was into it too. There are also experiences that are not wonderful, right? That are not necessarily consent experiences as much as they are just
bad
sexual experiences. And also that requires speaking up too, to say what you liked and what you didn't like, right? Or why you're not seeing someone else again. I think that's the problem, is that we do a lot of, we want to do a lot of mind reading, where we think we're just going to like miraculously know, what does this person want? What do they not want? What feels good? What doesn't feel good? Are they going to let me know if something hurts? And inevitably people don't, because unless we feel empowered to advocate for ourselves, we're going to say nothing. So my take on it is always have those tough conversations, acknowledge and be upfront about the fact that this conversation is hard for me to have, but I like you enough, and there are things I'd like to do with you, so I'm going to have it.
So let's talk about sex within Judaism. So I know from my limited knowledge of kind of sex and physical touch within the Orthodox community, they have very specific rules regarding sex and physical touch. So a lot of, for those of you that don't know, a lot of Orthodox Jews will not touch people of the opposite sex who they aren't directly related to until they're married. And then even when they are married, there are these I think they call them like family purity laws, where if a woman is menstruating or has just finished menstruating, husband and wife won't touch each other. And I don't want to say the reasons they say for that is to prepare couples for a time when intimacy isn't like a hallmark of their relationship. So it kind of, I guess, gets them ready for when they're not having sex, which I see your face. You're like, is there legitimately any merit in that? Or is this just kind of what they've decided that is what they're going to do?
I'm not, I have to be honest, I'm not an expert in Orthodox Judaism, so I'm the wrong person to offer professional guidance in, communities whose sexual values might be different than mine. That being said, I do think that there can be a lot of excitement and eroticism in waiting, in building excitement, in having limited touch. It's just not common for lots of people, right? But I can't say that someone's experience isn't going to be highly erotic if they've had to avoid touch. I mean, maybe it's super hot and amazing, right? It's real. I would hope it would. I
Yes.
would want it to be. But again, this is why, when sexual issues emerge within the Orthodox community, there are some amazing, amazing Orthodox sex therapists who are so well equipped and skilled in navigating these issues, because obviously the lens through which I see it is a very secularized, sex-empowered, sex-forward lens. So my version is going to be very skewed.
Is this kind of sex therapist within the Orthodox community a newer thing? I would assume, as I'm assuming it's women are talking to women and men are talking to men.
I mean, most of the people I know are women, and they're amazing. I mean, there is an entire community of Orthodox sexuality therapists.
Really?
It is quite extraordinary. Because there are complexities and dynamics within Orthodox partnerships that are not like the average, relationship that we talk about here.
It's very true. So as two Jewish women, I think we've probably been very aware that Jewish women in media are often depicted as prudish and non-sexual beings. Why do you think this is? And what can we as Jewish women do to break this stereotype in our everyday life? Because I feel like there's, a show that was really great about kind of breaking the stereotype was Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. But that's really the only time I've seen an example of an attractive young woman who is Jewish showing that she likes sex or was sexual. I really can't think of any other media where a woman's presented as Jewish and as a sexual person.
There's no doubt that the caricature of Jewish women is often overbearing, neurotic, helicoptering, all things to all people, but not necessarily sexual. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating because it's actually not at all indicative of a single Jewish woman I know. However, it was very much my understanding on some of those old comics, those old images, that old, Yiddish theater. That's where some of that had come from. And by the way, there is a place for that, but I think there's also an opportunity for us to reclaim what sexual Jewish woman looks like simply by existing in our natural state, which is sexual being, and recognizing that we're not separating our Judaism from our sexual side. People laugh all of the time. I absolutely do what I do for a living because it is rooted in my Jewish values. My belief in pleasure and equity and education and the intimacy of relationships, like that's all of, and the belief that everyone has the right to live and thrive with dignity. Those are all my Jewish values too. So I think we just need to do a better job at saying, I am a proud sexual Jewish woman, and I don't resemble the stereotypes, so maybe the stereotypes aren't accurate.
So you talked about earlier about being very proudly Jewish, and I think this is something that especially recently a lot of people who are very active on social media have, I don't want to say struggled with, but there's a lot of bad stuff out there. So what are some of the challenges that you face as a publicly Jewish woman who, is well known within your industry and just in general, because we haven't talked about, you being on numerous television shows and things like that. But what are the kind of the struggles of that, especially since October 7th, that you faced in being Jewish in general and pro-Israel?
And by the way, even that there's no other place people use words pro or anti. Like,
I know.
It's so absurd, right? I am a proud Zionist. Zionism is literally rooted in everything that I do. Zionism is the self-determination movement for Jews in our ancestral homeland. It is a radical decolonization project, and it is bastardized all the time by people who know nothing about Jews and nothing about Israel or the history. So there's that. That's my first blanket statement. Aggressive, possibly, but that's literally where I'm living these days, in aggression. The challenges are both endless and endless. I am an expert in difficult conversations, as I shared early on. Like, I cut my teeth talking about sex and sexuality as a young person, not just online, but in TV and in person in classes. And I was always used to people writing horrible shit about me because I talked about sex for a living. So I was used to it, and I knew how to deal with the adversity. And by the way, I'm probably a little bit of an intellectual masochist because I'm in this space. I love the fight. I do. I was made for the fight. Especially when I feel like I'm right, which is most of the time.
It's good to feel that you're right.
Yeah, totally. But I never would have imagined that in 2024, the difficult conversation I would have to have or encourage people to have would be around Judaism and Israel. You could have told me that a million times over. I would have never believed it. Never. So the challenges I have today are, I get a lot of nasty, horrible, like death wishing things said about me pretty regularly. But again, sometimes you get used to it, which is pathetic and yet true. They're not very creative, I have to say.
No, they're not, or intelligent.
No, they don't know. There's a lot of spelling and grammatical problems. They use the same lines over and over again. They're not really creative. I feel like maybe I would give them a little more credit if they could come up with something new. But an oven joke is like, it's, how 1940s. It's
yeah,
no. At this point.
I had someone say something like that to me on the street, and I was like, I was horrified because I was giving a tour at the time, but it's just like, that's where we're going with this.
Right. So there's, and by the way, my making light of it isn't because I don't think it's serious. It's just, I don't know another way to deal with it these days because it's everywhere. Because if I let myself really wallow in some of it, I don't think I'd be able to get out of bed. It's enough that the minute I wake up, I put on armor. Mental, not less physical, but like I'm ready for a fight wherever I go these days, whether it's online, whether it's having to deal with some professor at my kids' schools that are saying something horrible, or a kid that calls them some horrible name, or whether it's wondering if the person sitting next to me on the subway sees my mug in David and wants to kill me, like all of that stuff. Like, I have armor on the minute I wake up. And it is a little exhausting, I'm not gonna lie. But I try to make it more bearable by using a little bit of humor and grace. And so one of the things I've done is I've started to make content using the horrible things that people have said about me, because it is my way of controlling the narrative, and also using humor and a little bit of personality. And I also wanted to use it, and this was way before October 7th, to show my peers who told me I was crazy when I said that anti-Semitism was alive and kicking, that no, actually, it's very much here, and you don't have to look that far to find it. So October 7th, unfortunately, just put a giant exclamation point a million times over on all of the things that I had been feeling. And it was an atrocious wake-up call, but lesson learned. I got it. Like, I know who my friends are. I know who my enemies are. I know who has spoken out. I know who has said nothing. And I am... and I'll use a word that people don't like using for women, but I'm going to use it anyway. I can be a relentless bitch. And you know what? I'm going to remember. I will never forget. And I will make sure you don't forget either.
Good for you for kind of turning this around and empowering yourself. I'm not the kind of person, because I don't have 12,000 followers on Instagram. I have like less than 500. And I've started posting TikTok videos, and it's like amazing how these people will find you and they'll just start. And I'm like, I'm a nobody I have really no social media presence. I'm just starting to grow it. And it's amazing how they'll find you and just start saying the craziest things. It's like a full-time job for them.
First, you're not. First of all, you're not. No one is a nobody, right? Like platforms mean nothing. Literally mean nothing. It's just, to me, at the end of the day, regardless of what platform it's on, I don't really care what people say in response. It is my way of creating my own story, my own online journal for what I am experiencing at any given moment. Whether anyone likes it or doesn't like it, honestly, like, I don't care. I do it because I feel compelled to create a story that's my story. And maybe if we change the way we think about it, then some of that stuff is easier to navigate. But I do acknowledge that in all of these years, I have developed a very thick skin because I have had to. But I didn't always. There were times, and it wasn't really during it didn't really have to do with Jew hatred or anti-Semitism or whatever term we want to use. It was really when I was on a TV show. I was on a show called Married at First Sight for the first 3 seasons.
Yes.
Which seems like a lifetime ago at this point. And a rumor some horrible rumor about my fellow my professionals and I about our ethics. And it's like, because apparently facts don't matter. No one fact checks. No one
and
cares.
Definitions, words don't have definitions anymore.
No. So this rumor kind of like spread like wildfire, and it showed up in all of these places. And I was getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages saying the most awful things about me. And the worst thing you could say about me back then was to question my professional integrity, something I've worked so incredibly hard at. And I was so crushed. And so my husband came home one day and I was on the couch. It was like the middle of the afternoon. I was wasted and sobbing. Like I had plowed through a couple cocktails. I was like, had Twitter open in front of me. I was just like hysterical, just crying. And he looked at me, and very much to his credit, he said, "What's going on?" I said, "They're saying the most horrible things." I was a mess. And he said, "Who?" And I think the name was some version of Cupcake Lover 405. And he's like, "Whoa, what? Who is Cupcake Lover 405? And I said, "I have absolutely no idea. But they're saying all these terrible things." And he said, "Logan, first of all, if Cupcake Lover 405 met you on the street, would they punch you in the face or would they ask to take your picture?" And I had this moment and I thought, they're a fan of the show, clearly. I don't think they would punch me in the face. And he's like, "And this is who you're crying over." And I said, "Okay, so I think you might be right." I think you might be right. And he took my phone away from me for 24 hours till I pulled myself together, and it changed my perspective on everything. Now, that was when it was my professional integrity. My Judaism and my very proud Zionism, which I do think are very linked. I don't think you could really separate the two, as much as people would like to say you can. I don't think you can. But I feel like that is a different, deeply personal attack on me, one that I am fearless and very thick-skinned over because I know what that means, right? And that is something I am willing to fight to the end for. That is not something I'm going to be crying over. The only time I cried with that was when I realized that my field, the very progressive field of sexuality education, were a group of Jew haters. But, most of the other stuff, I'm just, my claws are out and I'm ready.
So I want to talk about what you just said, because the reports and even some of the video of the sexual violence that took place on October 7th is horrifying. And I've heard some stories. I haven't watched any video because I don't think I'm in an emotional place to do that.
Yeah.
And reportedly this is also still happening as well to the hostages. Do you think that people are ignoring this or saying it's not real because it's happening to Jewish women?
Yes, I do. I think that there is absolutely no reason why we have given credibility to every single person who has spoken up. Every single person, right? And by the way, I'm not saying that we shouldn't validate people's claims. I'm not telling you that we shouldn't. But there is evidence.
A lot of evidence.
There is testimony. There is documentation from the actual people who perpetrated the crimes, right? Gleefully engaging in what they are doing. And yet people are still saying, I don't think it's true. There's no evidence. We would say this to no other group. And at the end of the day, the issue is, I've said it before, this is about Israel now, but it's not really about Israel. This is about Jews. Because honestly, people are too dumb to know that there are other people other than Jews living in Israel, and how diverse it is. It's a breathtaking tapestry of diverse populations, but no one cares because it's called the Jewish state, right? So people assume it's only one group of people, but it is horrifying the lengths people will go to turn themselves and twist themselves into pretzels to justify their behavior. And we would never do it with anyone else. And yet this is the most horrific documented acts of depraved sexual violence we probably have seen ever.
I think what's even more, and you just mentioned this, crazy to me is not the people necessarily denying it, but the people who are, like you said, justifying it. And I think that's so much worse. And it's just sickening. Like as not only like as a Jew, but like as a human being, it's like this whole like resistance is justified when you're occupied call. I don't think, raping a woman until her pelvic bones are broken and then shooting her in the head is justified in any circumstance.
Right. And also, by the way, those big words people are using actually are not relatable to this conflict at all, which is another piece of it. But also, in what other group would anyone ever say that that's okay? That rape is a legitimate war tactic?
It's not.
We would never say. We would never. I know, like that's. We would never. No one would say it for anyone else. For anyone else, and there is a sense of. Oh no, it's not a sense. It's just a real feeling for me. I feel betrayed on levels that I did not feel like I could possibly be betrayed on by professionals in my community. I mean, my professional community is all about believing people and consent and bodily autonomy and talking about, healthy relationships and like all of the things that what happened on October 7th is literally antithetical to at its core. And yet my field is eerily silent. There's a lot of moral equivalencies and posturing. And where is the evidence? And to me, this is a betrayal. It is, I'm not one of those people who believes when someone says words are violence, but like this in this case, I feel this is like a violent attack on me when you can't bring yourself to condemn something because of who it happened to. But again, if I'm going to be a little snarky, and which is often how I have to be now in order to navigate some of the feelings I have, my take on it is, okay, lesson learned. Good. You just told me who you were. Now I know. I would much rather know who you are face to face than have you stab me in the back.
Do you think that part of the reason that people are thinking this is justified is because there's this narrative that Jews are white, and which is we know is not true? I love my favorite thing on Instagram is like people who are black and Jewish just like laughing at the white colonizer thing. Do you think that's part of it? Even though like I've literally seen pictures of hostages and like these people are of Mizrahi descent. Like, is that where this is coming from?
A lot of it. So I think that, first of all, the average person has no idea who Jews are. No idea. They think we are solely a faith and not realizing that we were a faith last of all of the categories. We were a faith.
It's true. I'm taking a Jewish history class now, and that is like a big question is when did Judaism become a religion? Like, what is a religion? And, all of these things. So this is my professor with a PhD in Jewish history says the same thing. So it's very true.
Yeah. I mean, we were a tribe, we're an ethnicity, we are a people, we are also a faith. We cross all modern racial categories and other ethnic categories. It's so silly. And the people who, think of us as being solely white, I mean, first of all, couldn't locate Israel on a map if their life depended on it. right? Wouldn't know the difference between, like, if you saw an Israeli from a Palestinian to a Druze to a Bedouin, would have literally no idea, couldn't tell the difference between anyone. But we've created this weird binary system of either you are oppressed or the oppressor, right? You are a victim or you are a victimizer. And because the stereotypes here have been Jews that look like us, as opposed to showing the complexity and the diversity within Judaism, people think that we're all, that Israelis and Jews are all white, despite the fact that, we seem not to be white enough for certain groups of people.
Yeah.
Like Nazis.
We're white when it's convenient.
We're the only people who are too white for some, right? On the left, not white enough for people on the right. And so here we exist in this weird space where we are like conditionally white sometimes, but even saying that erases all of the people who don't look like us, who are Jewish, and there are plenty of those. So I think this is a much deeper problem. I think this is an institutional problem. This is an educational problem. And I don't think it's getting solved anytime soon. I think that what's happening in Israel is just the beginning. I think that's the front line for now. But I think that what we are all going to have to deal with here, and what our kids are going to have to deal with and navigate, is a whole other type of war.
It's scary.
And we should be prepared for it.
I mean, you have a son in college. Like I would be terrified if my child was in college right now. And I was trying to explain to my sister, because she was unaware of what was going on. She was here last week, of the crazy things that are happening on campuses. Yeah. I mean, I'd be terrified, especially with some of the schools we mentioned, which are lauded as some of the greatest educational institutions in the entire world. The narrative that's going around and the things that I hear some public school teachers are saying in class, or showing maps that have Palestine. And right. It's just like, I feel like I'm living in a world where, like you said, facts aren't facts and words don't have definition. I got one of my college roommates I had to unfriend her on Facebook because she was trying to say, well, I feel like it's an apartheid. And I was like, feelings are not facts. And here is my argument showing you it's not that. And also that's not real. And I feel like I'd love to have like a legitimate, intelligent conversation with somebody who has an opposing view, but I haven't been able to do that because they keep coming up with these like talking points that I can disprove within 2 seconds. But they're like, but I feel this. And it's like, well, I feel like I should be a millionaire, but that doesn't mean that it's real. You know what I mean? Like,
right. And yeah, you can feel however you want, but if you stepped foot in there for a hot minute, you would see that, like, can't call it apartheid.
Yeah, it's not. I saw someone.
I know.
I saw someone that was like, I'm driving past the Islamic Art Museum in my apartheid state on the way to work. And I was like, I see you, sir. I see you. I do appreciate the Jewish humor a little bit that's come out of this, because people are, Jews are really great about using humor as a healing source. But here's the thing, we need to, because then all we would be doing is wallowing in trauma indefinitely, and we can't live like that. No. So, we have to find strategies to manage it. And again, that doesn't mean we don't feel it, but sometimes, at least within our own tribe, we use humor, because otherwise we're going to all sit and cry to each other. And that's a really hard thing. I mean, yes, I have a freshman and a freshman, so in college and in high school, but my kid has been spent all of high school fighting this stuff. So quite frankly, if anyone was prepared for a college campus, it was him. Far better prepared than most people were. And that's a horrifying thing to say, that he honed his skills on fighting anti-Semitism in high school, but he did. And also, I think the other piece of it that people don't always realize is, if you want to raise, and there are a lot of different ways to be a fighter, right? Some people like to be lightning rods. Some people like to work behind the scenes. They're equally important jobs, right? They're equally important. Not everyone has to be me, nor should be me, to be honest. There are people who do other things far better. But I would say the only reason we and our young people can be fighters in whatever capacity they choose to fight is when they know that the adults in their life have their back. That's the biggest thing. The reason my kids have been able to go toe-to-toe with people, with teachers, with professors, with administrators, is because they knew that their family had their back. And if something happened, if they got in trouble, if they got expelled, if they got into a fight, I was going to make it an international incident. And I still would.
right? Because I'm not letting it go. This is too important. And too many people spend too much time putting their heads down in the sand saying, it's not so bad, don't make waves, it's only one comment. It was never only going to be one comment.
No.
So here's where we are. What do we do with that?
It's my mother-in-law calls it being a mama bear or a lion, being very protective of your children, and it's nice to know that they have that support, because I feel like I want to be the kind of mother that when my daughter gets in a troubled situation, she's not going to think I'm scared what my mom's going to think, but I need to call my mom because she'll know what to do. And I feel like that goes exactly with what you're saying, that you have your kids back. So
yeah, and by the way, I love that phrase. I use that phrase all the time. That I am like a warrior lioness,
yes.
like just and not like in a hovering way, but if you cross the core values, or we're going to have an issue. We're going to have an issue. My young people will deal with it first, but if they choose to bring me in, all bets are off.
That's fair. That's fair. So I
can't make any guarantees.
So while we were talking, I kind of like bullet pointed something that I hadn't thought about. But have you seen the show on Netflix, Big Mouth?
Yes.
What do you think about Big Mouth? I feel like sometimes it can be even a little over the top for just in general. But I think in a lot of
totally over the top.
But I think in a lot of ways it's a very honest depiction of what it's like to be a teenager.
So I think in so many ways it is so brilliant. It's how we as adults would look, exactly how we as adults would look back on adolescence, with all of the complexities and the hideous moments and the hysterical moments. And then, of course, it is also very over the top. So I have a lot of students, teenage students, and who watch Big Mouth, who come with all sorts of information that isn't always accurate. And so my reminder to them is always, okay, listen, you're going to watch what you're going to watch. I just need you to know that what you're seeing is not entirely representative. So if you have questions, I think you should come to me first.
Yeah.
Like let's fact check. But look, if it gets people talking, and if it gets us talking, right? Because really, it's not designed for teens; it's designed for us as adults. So if it reminds us of what those experiences were like, and it helps us have a conversation with young people, then how awesome is that?
I feel like a lot of it's stuff that I blocked out, and I'm like, oh yeah, that. But with a musical number, which is one of the things I love about that.
And it's totally fun. I mean, and listen, I remember, I think it was the second episode when Jessie gets her period and she's wearing white shorts and someone has to get, like, I remember those moments, those really, like, harrowing moments where you think the world is coming to an end, but it's really a huge part of growing up, right? Having that moment where, you feel exposed and vulnerable and have to manage what are my next steps. That's a big part of resilience, developing resilience too.
You were recently in Israel, and I know from looking at your social media, you go quite a bit, but I feel like this was more of a different type of trip. So what did you do how recent was this, and what did you do when you were there?
So I've actually been there twice since October 7th. My last trip, I came back 5 days ago. I was there for 10 days and I was there for 17 days in December. I was there for a volunteer mission for Jewish National Fund USA. We were two different trips, both volunteer missions. I feel like in December, we were putting Band-Aids on things. We were like temporarily helping. We were doing all important things, feeding soldiers, cooking, doing agriculture, going to the hospital, putting together gift boxes, working with evacuee families. This trip was a little different. We were getting kibbutzim ready for people to come back home. Cleaning up, doing the IDF has been there. There have been 4 months of weeds and mud and insects and also doing agriculture. We were weeding onions. We were working with the Bedouin community in agriculture there. I painted a bomb shelter and an indoor playground in Sderot, which was super meaningful because the kids were coming back to the community and needed a safe place. So this felt heavy. I'm not going to say it does not feel heavy. It feels very heavy, but it feels like rebuilding is taking place. But it was a huge privilege to be there. Each time I've been, everyone is so surprised to see people, Americans there. And they are so grateful that we're there. And my response is always when they ask, why are you here? I say, it feels important to be here. But the truth is, and I share this as well, is that selfishly, I really should be thanking them too, because it feels very lonely being here lately, and that I needed to be there and have my feet on the ground and my hands in the dirt to feel my people too, because at least there, I don't put on the armor the same way. It's the one place I really feel like I can breathe. And so it's kind of like a shocking statement for a Jew from New York City to say, but that's really how I feel these days. And I know I'm not the only one, because I was sitting yesterday at a coffee shop talking to someone and kind of filling them in on the college campus situation. I was talking about our family, and a man was sitting next to us who was a little older than me, and he looked at me in the middle of the conversation and said, "I'm so sorry to eavesdrop. I'm so impressed and in awe by what you're doing and your family, and I just want to say thank you." And the man literally was crying. And I feel like that's where a lot of us are right now. We are all just about 3 seconds away from bursting into tears at any given moment. So I was there to bear witness. I was there to feel connection and to feel like I was doing something, because I felt so, pardon the sex-related word, but I was feeling so impotent here for so many weeks.
I'm glad you were able to go and help and feel hopefully a little bit better about everything.
Yes. I do. It was hard. It's hard to leave. There was a lot of trauma. There's incredible resilience, and there was a lot of, look, people still can't grieve yet, right? There are still 134 hostages.
Which is crazy to me.
There's still work going on.
I don't know about, because you're on the other side of the park, but I'm on the west side, and I feel like I walk past these posters every day, and I feel like I know these people, and it's become really, and I know that's the whole point of this, but it's become really personal. Like, as a mother, as a Jewish person, and as a woman especially, because that's a lot of who's still there, and they say the reason they're not releasing them is because they don't want them talking about what's happened to them.
Yeah, horrific things. Horrific things. And the fact that that's not the first statement people say, bring the hostages home. That's the other, I think when someone says to me, how do you have conversations? Like, how do you engage in a healthy discourse around this issue? Sometimes you can't. Because to me, if the first statement isn't, what happened was horrible, full stop, period, the hostages need to come home, full stop, period, then there's nothing else for us to talk about.
Well, it's a lack of humanity, in my opinion. And I know that's like a really sweeping statement, but it is. Because I can still feel bad about the children and civilians in Gaza, because I'm a human being and I can feel multiple things at once. But if you're the kind of person who can't, that it's a lack of humanity, in my opinion. And it's just really sad to see so many people who are so uneducated and don't understand, and then they're just showing their lack of humanity. And it's kind of depressing.
It's brutal. Though I would say maybe if anything comes out of this, is that the Jewish community in the diaspora becomes stronger, recognizes who they are, recognizes this unbreakable connection to our homeland, that we are responsible for each other, that as much as Israel needs us right now, we need her too. History has shown us that time and time again, and that maybe everyone here was getting a little complacent, and we've just been reminded of who we are and why we need each other. And that's a really scary thing, but a really important thing historically. I think this is going to forever be a major, and I hate the phrase inflection point because I feel like people use it all the time, but I think that this is one of those moments for the global Jewish community. I think there's a before and an after, and the entire global community will change.
I definitely agree. It's I will have to say though that I am tired of living through these once in a lifetime crazy turning points. I'm a little over it.
I understand.
It's been
I get it.
It's been exhausting.
I know.
I'm not even 40 yet, and I've dealt with this 9/11, couple
I know.
wars, October 7th, January 6th. I'm done. I want like a break. So now we're going to do my actor studio style questions. So like I said, these can be short form, or you can kind of elaborate a little bit should you like. What is your favorite Yiddish word?
Verbissina.
Can you explain what that means for my listeners who don't know what that means?
It's basically, it's someone who's constantly scowling. It's like a constant, like
resting bitch face.
I feel like modern people would call it resting bitch face. I don't know. Like it was a word that my mom used growing up, and I'm obsessed with it. And it's a word that you hear it and you're like, oh my God, I feel what that word is. I could see it.
And that's what I love about Yiddish is like, it's very like you feel the words. I love it. What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
My favorite Jewish holiday, Kol Nidre. It's the eve of Yom Kippur. I find the quiet and the music, I find it magical and peaceful. And I desperately need that sense of there is a world out there more important than you. And I get it that night every year.
If you were to have a bat mitzvah today, what would the theme of the party be?
Zionist Barbie, of course.
Zionist Barbie. Well, if you have another bat mitzvah, that sounds like a fun party. I'd like to attend. What profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
Rabbi.
If heaven is real, I haven't gotten that one yet. If heaven is real and God is there to welcome you, what would you like to hear them say?
Look who's waiting for you, and I'd like my grandfather to be standing behind them.
I said something similar. It's hopefully what that is. So is there anything else that you want to talk about, like a project or a book? I mean, this is one of my longest interviews.
Do I have those these days? I feel like my life is literally like Logan Levkov, former sex educator, big mouth Jew is really like
it's when you make business cards.
I feel like I get these days. But by the way, that being said, like truth be told, and I wouldn't change any of it. I feel like I was kind of made for this moment. And I don't mean that in like an egomaniacal sort of way. I just feel like I look in the mirror these days and I see my grandparents looking back at me. I know what my responsibilities are. I feel it deep in my bones. And I feel like I've been prepared for this time. So as challenging as it is, I feel prepared. I feel prepared. And I'll do whatever I have to do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing everything and, giving advice. And I had a great time. Hopefully you did too.
I did.
So this is Nicole Kelly, and this has been She Brew in the City.